I'm Michael Krasny, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Gray Matter with Michael Krasny, a weekly podcast of deep dive interviews with national and international authors, journalists, tech and business experts, artists, scientists, entertainers, and opinion shapers. And you can become a member of this podcast simply by going to graymatter.show, and that's gray with an E. You can also stream us live at 11 a.m. Pacific time on Fridays when we include your questions and comments, and please feel free to add your questions to the mix here. We cover a wide range of intellectually engaging and timely topics, distinguished, we feel, by high-level content and technical excellence. And in this episode, I welcome Kelly Corrigan, the host of the PBS show Tell Me More, and author of 4 New York Times bestsellers, Lift, The Middle Place, Glitter and Glue, and Tell Me More. She also has a podcast and a book called Hello World, and she was a student of your humble host many years ago when, full disclosure, she has recalled publicly on a couple of occasions how I discouraged her from her ambition to be a writer, and she has become an eminently successful one, widely praised. Shows you how prescient and deficient I can be. She's a graduate of the University of Richmond and also got a master's degree from San Francisco State. And I'm pleased to welcome her to Gray Matter with Michael Krasny, and welcome Kelly Corrigan.
Hi, Dr. Krasny.
Still Dr. Krasny. I can't get away from
Forever.
it.
Forever. I never saw anybody do what you did. Let me just say from the top, when I took my notes in your class, it was theories of literary criticism. And on the right-hand page, I would write the notes of what you were actually talking about. And on the left-hand page, I would keep a running list of words that I'd never heard before. And on every page, there were 8 words or references or literary terms that I just was not familiar with. I was a straight A English student from high school through college. And still, it was like
I'm glad I helped increase your vocabulary. I'm glad.
Yeah. I never saw somebody be so articulate on their feet for 3 straight hours.
Well, thank you for that. And now you have become the articulate one on your feet and a masterful interviewer. And I want to talk about all that with you. A lot of success. In fact, I came across a photograph. You were for a while involved in the National Kidney Foundation literary lunches, which I've emceed for many years. And there was a picture of you and me and Norman Lear. And I remember there was a little bit of excitement on your part of being around Norman Lear. And then I thought, now you've interviewed all these celebrities. I mean, you've really made your mark and you're high flying. And I'm very pleased for your success. And so I've got to wear sackcloth and ashes here and do some Hail Marys maybe about not recognizing your talent as I should have. But I did have lofty standards, lofty literary standards.
Yes, and the kind of writing we did in your class was super analytical. And I don't know that I don't know that I'm a standout in that way at all. The kind of stuff that I publish is story-based. It's more like Anne Lamott or, other memoirists. Mary Karr would be like an aspirational name for me.
But you're doing analytical work. In fact, I've seen some of your interviews, and I saw one with Francis Collins, and I thought, boy, that's pretty. And I know you like to interview smart people. So do I. You like to interview people with high IQs and high EQs, as you put it. And Francis Collins was the head of the Genomics Project and also NIH for years, and is also a devout Christian. It's just fascinating to me, always been. When you interview somebody like that, what are you aspiring to? What's the homework that you do, for example?
I sort of feel like there's 2 goals. One is to get at the nut of his work in a way that is palatable for the average Joe who's listening or watching. And then the second is to make you want to know more about him by opening up some personal element of his life that makes him irresistible to you. So with Francis Collins, he's a music nut. He's in a band with other members of the NIH staff. And I think the name of the band is something like No Down Payment or something like that, because they're not allowed to take payment, but they play bat mitzvahs and they play weddings and they play retirement parties to this day. And so I was asking him about music and well-being and the neuroscience that's showing that if you're a piano player at age 6, you have larger neurons in this one part of the brain. And I said, what was the turning point for you musically? And he said, well, we had this old organ and I still have it to this day in West Virginia where I grew up. And in fact, my father was a folk music expert. I think he taught it somewhere. Like he reviewed it. And he said I said, what's the best concert you've ever been to? And he sort of smiled, and I was like, oh, this is good. And you're so lucky when you ask that last question and it turns out to reveal something awesome. And he said, well, this is going to sound kind of funny, but it was on my 17th birthday, and this kid came to our house to play for my father, and his name was Bob Zimmerman. And it was Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
And he said, at first, I didn't want to go downstairs. I didn't feel like participating. And then he said, I sat on the stairs and watched Bob Dylan sing.
You bring out a lot of those kinds of human qualities and little nuances and stuff. And in fact, when you mentioned West Virginia with Francis Collins, I was thinking, I saw your interview with Jennifer Garner, and there was a lot of material just built around the fact that she came from West Virginia.
Yeah.
And a lot of these celebrity interviews, they don't necessarily go that route. They'll go, tell me about the last film you did, or the gossipy type of stuff and everything, as opposed to going to the early formative experiences, which is what you do.
Yeah. I feel like the most interesting conversation you could have with almost anybody is tell me about your mother and your father and your childhood at home. I feel like you can get anywhere from there that's interesting and relatable and moving. And Jen is a person whose mother grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, devastatingly poor. And when you hear Jen talk about her mom's childhood, she doesn't mention poor. And it's like the 12th thing that she's going to tell you, because her childhood was predominantly outside, because they grew their own food, because they were making dinner together as a family, because there were no distractions, because they were well known in the community. So if someone fell sick or if they had a bad crop year, people took care of them. And then finally, at the very end, she'd say, and then of course, she never had $2 to rub together. So I feel like you can count on a line of questioning that takes you to people's parents to reveal something that's really worth knowing and worth thinking about and worth considering, because the other thing that it does is bring up the way the world has changed. So a kid in Oklahoma who's growing up on a farm now also has a phone in their pocket. And so there's an awareness of what they don't have that Jen Garner's mom did not have. And so it always opens up that avenue of reflection also of how things have changed one generation to the next.
You also did, if I may say so, a much better job with David Byrne than I did. I found talking to him initially a little bit like pulling teeth. But then I was able to create some humor, and that made a difference. And it can often make a difference, just like asking about parents or whatever. Yeah.
The David Byrne thing was so interesting because, probably like you, in terms of preparation, I had listened to 10 interviews he'd given on double speed to just see what are the stories he always tells, what are the little conversational ruts that he might fall into, how can I take it somewhere it hasn't been taken before, et cetera. And then also just to get used to the rhythm of his voice and so that you know when to wait for him to finish his thought and how long his pauses are and all that sort of interpersonal conversational rhythm that you're trying to establish. But then he started talking about how he wanted to be when he was young. I said, oh, you were cut from the choir. As a 12-year-old, were you devastated? And he said, no. And I said, oh, you didn't want to be a musician? He said, no, I wanted to be a postman. And I was like, you wanted to be a postman? And he said, yeah, I thought I could be by myself all day and no one would bother me and I would have a pension. I was like, so you're 12 years old thinking about a pension. And that made him laugh. And then I said, I would have thought that the thing about being a postman for you would be the cool uniform. And then that really made him laugh. And then he changed.
Yeah, I got him to laugh too, for an entirely different context. I said, you know the story about Calvin Coolidge? And somebody said he was known as Silent Cal. And somebody said, I'll bet I can get him to say 3 words, and went up to him and said, I made a bet that I can get you to say 3 words. And Coolidge said, you lose. That was the breakthrough, though. I mean, that got him to talk more. And you did the same thing. I mean, it's levity that can really change things and alter things. Your first interviews with Bryan Stevenson? I mean, for the PBS show? Yeah. Yes.
It was heaven. We were so nervous about not bringing home everything we needed to make an A+ interview, because it was, it's like an audition almost, your pilot. And so we recorded with him for 6 hours. Can you imagine? I mean, he gave us 3 hours one day, and then we went back the next morning. It took 3 hours more of footage. And we walked around EJI and the monuments and and then we sat, across from each other. But the most fun thing that happened in that interview is that you get this sense that he is taking on the burdens of the world. Like 150 guys on death row have his cell phone number, which to me means that he might be the most important person in 150 people's lives. Like when they call him, they want him to answer so badly. They need him so much. And I was getting the sense that would, weigh heavy on a person. And there happened to be a grand piano in this Airbnb house in Montgomery, Alabama, that we had rented to shoot the interview part. And I said, what do you do to relax, to keep your head straight? And he said, I play piano every day. And then I kind of glanced over at the piano like, interested? And he got up and he played piano for all of us. And it was just such spectacular serendipity that there happened to be this beautiful instrument right there for him.
Your enthusiasm and joy for what you do comes through. It comes through now, even when you talk about it. What do you get out of this, though? I mean, in the sense of, I used to pose questions as a professor, you may remember, like, I have a feeling Kelly Corrigan really wants to do good, wants to inspire people. Why do good? Why inspire people? Do you ask yourself that question? Those kinds of questions?
I mean, I just feel like if you can help tip the scales with what you do, you should. If the choice is make things slightly better, slightly worse, make them slightly better. And so we say that we're looking to interview world positive people doing world positive things. Like we want to amplify great stuff because, it's a hopeless time, and hope feels like this essential ingredient to progress. Like, God help us, as if you turn cynical, I think we know where that road leads. And the fact is, there are these people who are making great music or doing great work or setting people free after 30 years on death row. And so if we could, the problem is that it's not necessarily what media buyers want. They would much prefer that I be starting fights with people or bringing in controversial people and putting them on the spot and like giving them a zinger. And that's really of no interest to me. It doesn't seem like we need another person doing that.
So you're an anomaly, really, aren't you? You're not doing clickbait.
I'm not, but I pay for it probably in audience size and income and readiness of the media market to collaborate with me.
What is your audience size? It's respectable, I'm sure. It's public television, yeah.
Yeah. I think we get 500,000 people watching every episode on PBS, something like that.
That's damn good.
Yeah, I think so. But, the other thing I'll never forget is when Jon Stewart retired, him saying in this kind of devastating aside, I don't know if I've done any good. I don't know if all of this is just so much whipping people into a frenzy who were already inclined to agree with everything that came out of my mouth. So it's hard to get positivity in front of the right audience.
It's hard to measure, but you have a lot of positivity. I mean, it's just your nature. It's in your chromosomes, I would venture. I mean, the sense is, do you run a risk, though, of being a little like Dr. Pangloss or Pollyanna or something along those lines, or perceived that way? Yeah.
Probably, but I'm funny, and that helps. Like you can be super sweet and saccharine, but I can really crack a joke. And so it helps people think, oh, well, she's not all that. She's not all. And I don't mind sharing, sort of true and revealing stories about myself that kind of cut into what would be this overly sweet perception. And it's not my perception. I mean, my perception is like, hopefully, fingers and toes crossed, the world is 51% good and 49% bad.
How much of you is your Roman Catholic or Irish Catholic background, do you think? I mean, what you just described for us.
None. Maybe none. I mean,
you had a devout mother, though, right?
Both my parents went to church every day of their lives.
Yeah.
And my father was very upbeat by nature. Like he couldn't wait to fall in love with the next person who was standing in front of him. Had 1,000 questions for everybody. Always on a path to discovering what's fantastic about the next person. And my mother was sort of content. She wasn't necessarily as external as he was. But I guess one way that you could say I tap back into the Irish Catholic thing is that because it was such a foundational part of my parents' lives, it may have defined the environment that I grew up in. And so it may be a less direct effect, but nonetheless there.
So your father was more of an influence because you look for the good things in people. I mean, you try to bring them out and embellish them. And
Yeah, my mom was quicker to skepticism.
Mhm.
Yeah, my mom would be a little side eye, like, all right, let's see what's going on here. You know, and my father would be like, Michael Krasny, God, I love that guy. You know, like huge reactions.
Well, it's also, in my mind at least, you go back to the old sod and all these things that carry through maybe too much Irish literature, particularly plays like Long Day's Journey into Night resonate here, where you think about the successive generations carrying on so much traditional. I mean, it's true for Jews, it's true for Italians, it's true for a lot of people of European heritage. But I was just curious. The TED Talk was a kind of turning point for you, though, wasn't it?
It was a turning point in the sense that it helped me put my finger on something that I had been observing over many years of comparing parenting stories with my nearest and dearest. So my kids are 21 and almost 23. And in conversation with my friends, I was discovering that they were also being put to the test in ways that were beyond prediction and imagination. So and you would know this too, of course, everyone who has been enmeshed in family life would know this, but you know, you're in the course of an ordinary day and someone drops some bomb on you. Like I stopped taking the medication, or I cut myself, or I weigh myself before and after every meal, or he raped me, or she says I raped her, or. And you are required, as a person who loves the afflicted, to respond in a way that at best is productive and useful, and at worst is like neutral. And it's hard to get your facial expression and your posture and your tone of voice and the actual words you choose just right so that the person can find their footing and take the next step. And so I was wanting to cut against what I knew the theme of the conference was the brave and the brilliant. And I knew that they were going to go long on AI and space travel and quantum computing. And I wanted to talk about kitchen table bravery. I wanted to say, yes, also, there are people right now that are doing the invisible work of holding together other people who are on the brink. And so I wanted to go into that so deeply that I would terrify people almost at what might yet be coming for them as people who love other people. And then I wanted to flesh out what is the reward for that kind of bravery? And what I came to, and what the turning point was, that I get to keep forever, which is more than enough, is that the reward is a full human experience where you get to experience every emotion at maximum dosage.
Did you have any particular response? I'm asking you because of your literary pedigree and being somewhat maybe responsible for your literary education to what's come out about Alice Munro. Do you know the story?
Yes, that she ignored her daughter's reports of child abuse, sexual abuse.
Sexual abuse from her stepfather.
Oof.
Yeah. Ignored it and to some extent, not only ignored it, but carried on with married to this man, even though she was cognizant of what had happened.
Yeah, horrifying. Horrifying on all counts.
It's monstrous. It's monstrous. Yeah.
Monstrous. And also just sort of your ordinary human weakness on display. It's not so unimaginable to me that there are some set of people who couldn't do anything but that. But it reveals a weakness, a moral weakness in her that I wouldn't have attributed to Alice Munro. It sort of points out how roundly we turn people into heroes when we like one little thing that they do. Like a person being a beautiful short story writer does not indicate that they have an infallible moral compass. But once you admire someone for one skill, it can balloon into this idea about them as somebody special writ large. And then here it is. Turns out that she's actually quite flawed and quite weak, and that her inaction was so destructive to somebody who she must have loved. I mean, if you can't do it for your kid, who can you do it for?
Well, where does forgiveness and empathy come into these kinds of equations, though? Because in so many instances, you've got horrible deeds, that sort of brook no forgiveness or no empathy, or ought to, perhaps, in many people's minds, hearts.
Well, you'll drive yourself mad if you withhold forgiveness. I think that's been made clear. So there is an argument to find some sort of forgiveness to save yourself from roiling with vitriol for all your days. I don't know how possible that is. I haven't been wronged at that level. I'm getting, as I get older, I'm getting more capable of feeling more empathy. And I think it's related to a certain kind of humility that develops over time, where you can see that you have blown it in various ways, and you can extrapolate from the smaller errors you've made and wonder if that would lead you, if the situation had been different, if your circumstances had been harder, if you had been made of different stuff, could it be that you would do something similar? I think I'm getting better at considering that.
I could hear a counterintuitive voice saying, but now you're in a stellar role. You've established this empire. You're a star, sort of, in some ways. In other words, humility usually doesn't attach itself to that kind of success, even though you don't have as many viewers as you'd like to have, or as you ideally have. Huh?
I don't think about what I'm capable of in my relationships as associated with what I do for my job. And I don't think what I do for my job is nearly as hard or important as what I do in my personal relationships. So I could have a really nice career that's enjoyable and remunerative and creates opportunities for me. But that wouldn't necessarily mean that I was a great wife or a great sister or a great mother. Like, my mom just died. And in that process, I was watching how different people dealt with her condition. And to me, that was the test of all tests. Like, to me, it seemed bigger than all the other ways that you could show your adulthood and that you could show your morality and you could live according to some set of values.
I agree with you. I think those are the moments where people really show their real souls. And was she a great mom? And
she was a great mom in a very specific way. So she was not the mom that I wanted when I was young. She was very quirky. She wore her turtlenecks inside out because the seams bothered her, and she would stop people and ask how much they paid for their car because she was shopping for a similar car. And she would question everything in ways that seemed impolite and not ladylike. Like, she would say, if you were talking to the airlines, let's say, and you were trying to use miles that had expired and they were telling you can't use them, she would just look at you and say, hang up. Just hang up and call back. Another person will answer. You can start over. So she was unusual. She drove her own car. Like, my dad and she would go to church together, but she wanted her own car because he hung around after church to glad hand everybody. And she wanted to get out of there and get to the Acme and get the groceries and get home. And so I wanted someone who was like, oh, Kelly, let's go shopping and then have lunch at the mall. And, oh, you look so beautiful. And who do you have a crush on today? And that was not who I had. But as I got older and became a parent and became a woman, I thought, oh, you're so original. And you're so so live by your own code, and you're so unaffected by the societal norms. It's fantastic. So I really came to, and she was insanely consistent. So if you read like 1,000 parenting books, one of the things that they say is, good or bad, whatever your predilections are, if you behave in a very predictable way, it gives your kids this terrific sense of stability.
I saw a phrase that I came to associate with you, good enough parenting, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I could have told you what my mom would do. You could give me 100 scenarios and I could get 100 predictions right on how my mom would respond. Utterly consistent. And I think that's a gift to me.
Well, she imparted it to you. That's valuable indeed. We got some questions coming in. I'd like to go to them. And if you have a question, please feel free. First question is from Cindy in Denver, Colorado, who says, what does it take to prepare for a TED Talk?
It's so stressful. It's stupid. It really is. I was almost embarrassed by how much I cared about it, because I give a lot of talks in a year. And, I've been doing this for a long time, for 20 years now. And the fact that I was so obsessed with every word of this. But what I found was kind of fun was using my voice memos. So I would write some things and then I would record it into my voice memo. And then 2 days later, I'd be on a walk and I'd listen to it. Because you're being received through the ear, not the eye. It's not on the page. And so that was really helpful to me to hear the phrasings and the sentence length. And, you just work differently when you're in writing. You can.
But there's a difference between giving a TED Talk and conducting an interview or being the host. And those differ from writing. I mean,
right.
They're all different media.
Like I've written some op-eds for the New York Times, and you can just do things in an op-ed that you can't do on a TED stage, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So, for the most part, I really enjoyed the assignment. And it did help me come to clarity on something that really matters to me. And it did help me to honor a group of people doing a kind of work that I think is super significant. So all in, great. But oh my God, was I overthinking it?
Here's Jerry from Aurora who says, I'm getting a sense your interviews are non-confrontational, non-ideological, more about the person. When you've gotten to know the person, was there anyone who disappointed you?
No. Really, no, except this one person, and I can't say it online because he's super famous. But we were having such a bang-up interview, and it felt like it was going so well. And, when you're interviewing someone, especially live in person, the whole set is quiet, and I am just eye contact with this person for 90 minutes we record. So it's almost like a date. It's so intense. There's no phones. There's no interruptions.
It's a lot like a date.
Yeah. And I almost fall in love, male, female, old person, young person. Like every time I'm full of emotion. And this person was no different. And then the minute they called cut, he just stood up and said, thank you very much, and walked off.
Oh.
Normally people hug, they give you their phone number, they thank people on the set. They say something to Steve, the producer. There's some people take pictures if they're super famous. It was just so abrupt.
Because he was performing when you were interviewing him. The performance was over.
Yes, and he's a brilliant performer. So after he left, we were all kind of like, oh, God, I hope we didn't offend him. And then Steve, the producer, was like, don't worry, it's going to be an incredible interview. And I was like, I know, but that bums me out.
How many on your staff?
None. It's all contractors.
Oh, you mentioned Steve. How many people do you work with?
So the PBS show is produced I collaborate with a producer named Steve Goldblum at Second Peninsula, and they're an independent, and then we deliver it to WIDA, and WIDA is our presenting station, and then they put it on the PBS stations. But so Steve is really the person I work with on all the PBS stuff.
Any feelings about PBS? They've come under criticism for maybe being too woke and that sort of thing. You feel you have a good working relationship and you like working with them?
I don't work with them very much. I really just deliver. I'd like a product gets uploaded and not by me. So it's very distant.
But you have your own studio, don't you?
We shot a 2 seasons in my apartment in Tribeca. So that was my office that you were seeing. And then they remove all the equipment.
Now in Montana, we should mention, just for the record, Yellowstone country.
I'm in Montana in my cloffice, which is a closet office.
Closet office, closet.
My cloffice.
Here's Reed, who says, Larry King famously did minimal preparation for interviews, saying he wanted to learn along with the audience. How thorough is your preparation? And he also adds, I enjoy your work. Thank you for that, Reed.
My preparation is pretty thorough, and I understand why Larry King wouldn't want to prepare. Like, we're doing a podcast series right now. We're putting it into production called Shook by a Book, where we're asking famous thinkers to tell us about a book they were assigned in school that really changed their thinking in some important way. And so, obviously, it seemed imperative that I would read the book that my guests chose. The problem is that you're instantly talking inside baseball. And I'm super worried about this one episode in particular, where we were knee deep in the details of this text that I am sure 0% of my listeners have read. So it's tricky. And Larry King might be onto something by actually having about the same amount of information as his viewer, because I have much more information than my viewer or my listener when I'm interviewing somebody. But I don't think I could sleep the night before if I didn't have the goods. And I think sleeping the night before and being able to eat the day of and being relaxed because you know you've got the goods makes it possible to have a great conversation. I think if I didn't have it mapped out in my mind, not so much, but like if I didn't feel confident that I know 5 places I hope the conversation goes, I don't think I could enjoy it. And I think me enjoying it helps other people enjoy it.
Feel the same way. We're on the exact same wavelength. I have a work ethic probably like yours. I think Larry King, I don't want to be short shrifting here, but I'm writing a book about interviewing, and I'm writing about a lot of interviewers. And Larry King was a schmoozer, basically, and he could come in and just rely entirely on his curiosity, and that was a strength. People have said Joe Rogan does that too, and I think it's true. He will be ignorant about things. He's not afraid to show that he's ignorant. It's very important sometimes, especially of many things, myriad number of things that I am ignorant about, to show that ignorance. And that way you're identified with by whomever may be listening, and you're learning at the same time that they're learning. But I also have to be utterly, completely prepared, which reminds me, like I said, I saw a lot of your interviews, and I just want to ask you about one with Judd Apatow, again, a big name, look very comfortable and all that. And you seem to be listening with a particular kind of studiousness, a lot of yeses and hums and everything. It's hard to talk about humor, though. I mean, it's a difficult subject to talk about because, well, you got to be funny. That can be meta a little bit if you're actually really being funny. But you're trying to, in some ways, draw things out that are pretty abstract, and yet you seem to be comfortable with them, and you seem to bring them to the fore and cover a lot of areas.
I feel bad for people who are funny people, quote unquote, because I think that they must feel this expectation that you're going to be a witty, snappy conversationalist. And that does not necessarily always coexist with being able to write a great, funny movie. Like, you might be just a great analytical mind. My daughter, my 21-year-old, does stand up. And she has done it in clubs where there's a live audience. And this summer, she's been doing it in New York City, where the only other people in the audience are stand-ups working on their material. And they don't laugh out loud. They kind of nod. Like, if she says something funny, the only reaction she's going to get from a peer is, or they might say, that's funny, but not laugh. And I think that when I was talking to Judd, I was hoping that he could sense in me that I don't need you to like crack a joke a minute here. That's not why I'm here. I'm really interested in your mind and what you're trying to get at.
Well, he was someone who wanted to be a stand-up comic, but didn't make it. He became a writer, basically, of comedy and producer of comedies.
Yes. But the thing I wanted to talk to him about was his interest in women and the work that he's done with women, and if that's informed by or reinforced by his relationship with Leslie Mann and his two daughters, who are both in the business, who were both early stars in his movies, in some unforgettable scenes. And This Is 40. And then his work with Amy Schumer in Trainwreck and Lena Dunham on Girls, and what he thought, why he seemed to be so interested in collaborating with women. And then he started talking about his mom. And his mom left when he was 13 or 14 years old, and she never came back. And on her deathbed, she said to him, apropos of nothing, I never meant to be gone that long.
Here's Billy from Miami who says, throughout all of your interviews, do you see any common threads? Thank you, Billy.
People who really make it are charming. There's just, I think the world opens up to people who have strong interpersonal skills, who are comfortable in conversation, who like being with people, who like getting to know people, who like that kind of collaborative atmosphere. So I haven't talked to that many people who I found cold or uninterested in playing.
People are on their best behavior, too, often when they're being
Yes, of
interviewed.
course,
Yeah.
of course. Yeah. Yes. I mean, they're trying to make an impression, but they're good at it. I guess I would say the thing I have noticed is that they're good at making a good impression.
Especially if they're seasoned, well-seasoned. You talk a lot about mothers and daughters, and what about husbands? You're married to someone who's got a profile in Silicon Valley, I think, isn't he?
Yeah, he is a, as my father said at our wedding, he's a bona fide Silicon Valley whiz kid, lovey. He has worked for startups. He went to Stanford Business School, and then he's worked for startups ever since. And of course, as you get older and your kids leave the nest, this person becomes newly important. And I must say, I knew when I married him that I was marrying the right person. And it has really panned out. He's a really, really good person to live with. He's a good person to co-parent with. He's a good person to talk to about all my adventures and projects in the media world. He's fun to watch TV with. He's fun to cook with. He's a good dancer. Like, I really like him.
Boy, you got it right the first time, huh?
I did. I really did. It's just dumb luck, but not so much dumb luck. Like, I feel like I didn't get married until I was 32, and I was 30 the day I met him. And I remember early on that he was talking about his sister and his mother in these glowing terms. And it meant so much to me. I was like, all right. Like, if you love your mother, if you think your mother's fascinating, if you think your mother's a great reader, if you think your mother has great taste in movies, like, I just hadn't heard that before. And so I don't know, I just remember thinking that was a really big deal to me.
So you revere your mother-in-law also? You have a good relationship with her?
Yeah, she's easy to have a good relationship with. She's a totally delightful person. From Paducah, Kentucky.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, she is. Your husband's also from Kentucky? Or?
He's from Little Rock, Arkansas.
Ah, so both beneath the Mason-Dixon line. That has not played any role? I mean, there's Southern roots in your marriage? Or has it?
No, not really. His parents are... His parents go to see a movie every single week, and then they call us with the review. So, like, and they'll watch anything. They're super culturally tuned in. And so our favorite review was, we call my mother-in-law Millie, M-I-L, mother-in-law, and she calls me Dilly. And she said, "Hi, kids. This is Millie. Your father and I just saw Fight Club, and the message is, Fight Club sucks. It is a dark and worthless movie. All right, love y'all."
You have some comedy chops. You know, your daughter doesn't, maybe comes by this naturally. That was very well done.
Fight Club sucks.
Yeah, you have your own Siskel and Ebert in your in-laws.
Totally. And they have the best accents. It would be a great show.
Now, this is season 7 of your TV show, and you take up a question here. What does it mean to be well? I mean, just a question like that you can build a lot around, and you're building a lot around it, especially in our modern times, these dark times, as you alluded to before. So you get into mental health and you get into physical health and everything. What do we mean by wellness? Now, when you investigate something like that, where do you go look for experts, or who do you decide, and how do you decide?
I had a couple people that I could ask and from the outset and kind of vet names with. So on the podcast, I've had this woman, Lisa Feldman Barrett. Have you ever heard of her?
The name rings a bell, but, distant
She's
one.
a neuroscientist. She's in the top 1% of all scientists cited worldwide. So she's hugely respected.
Yeah.
And she wrote a book called How Emotions Are Made and 7.5 Lessons on the Brain. And
you had read her? Yeah.
I had read her, and then I had interviewed her.
Huh.
And so of all the docs I had access to, she was somebody who would always answer my text. So as people came up, we knew that we wanted to talk about these component pieces of wellness, like movement and nutrition and sleep, ... and connection, spirituality. And so when I first came up with our list of names that we had attached to each of these topics, I just sent her the whole Google Doc and said, tell me what you think of these people. And she would just cross names out. And I didn't ask why. Like, I really deferred to her. And if she thought somebody was worth their salt, then we would have them on. And then I cross-referenced it. I had 2 other doctor friends, and I cross-referenced it with them just in case there was some, I don't know, new information that Lisa wasn't aware of about something that maybe had been debunked. I mean, a big feeling I had going into that series was, oh my God, I really don't want to add to the confusion around these things. Like, I have so much empathy for all of us who are trying to be well and trying to help our family members be well, that we cannot have anything that's said on here that is not absolutely peer-reviewed, consensus-builded, full consensus science. Because the last thing on earth I want to do is somehow create another off-ramp that leads nowhere for people. And then I wanted to crash the science into real lives. So in this season, we did something really unusual, which is that we had 2 civilians, we called them, on my side of the conversation, and then one expert, one medical expert, somebody like Francis Collins or Atul Gawande or Esther Perel. And the civilians and I would say, right, I hear you on this sleep thing, but what about blankety blank? And we had a lot of fun picking civilians who were friends of the show. So like Kamau Bell had done a few episodes with me, and we invited him back. He's a great comedian. He's from the Bay Area.
I know him.
Or Kelly Corrigan had done stuff with me. And so she came in for a couple episodes as a civilian, as a person who's trying to be well. And it was a cool combination. I really enjoyed making those.
Good idea, yeah. And you mentioned spirituality and all this, and you also were looking for faith at one point and doing a program built around search for faith. I mean, a lot of these things kind of come home to you, don't they? They get visceral and they get into your own interior life.
For sure. For sure. I mean, you need to find an engine. You need to find fuel. And maybe that's often within.
So where do you find the most fuel?
I mean, I'm pretty intrigued by parenting, I must say. I find all the stages of it hard and fascinating and moving and confounding. And I feel sometimes daunted by how possible it is to throw your whole heart into the endeavor and not really get the outcome you were hoping for, meaning, happy, well-adjusted children, or to like make it slightly more advanced, happy, well-adjusted children who mean something to each other. Like, it's hard to make a family that works. It's hard to make a family that's glued together, that brings each other comfort, that it's a place of rest for one another rather than a place of angst or damage. I mean, most people who are in therapy are talking about a family member. So it's that hard to make it work. And I think about my husband and I, and we just came into it with such pure hearts, as my parents did, as their parents did. And sometimes it is enough. And sometimes, for mysterious reasons, the people don't stay connected. They don't feel anything for one another, or they hurt each other. So I could think about that and learn about that and read about that and wonder about that.
Have you ever read a
forever.
novelist named Ivy Compton Burnett by any chance?
No.
She's a novelist who uses families as a microcosm of all kinds of, well, struggles, animosity, adversities, toxicity. I mean, it's pretty, her vision is a pretty dark one, but nevertheless, this is what a lot of people experience in families. Tolstoy was right in many respects. Making families cohere and making them stay together and making love and values operative in every way is a challenge. It's a daily challenge, isn't it?
And it's rare. I actually think it's rare.
Much more than people believe, because a lot of the cinema, unfortunately, gives us some rather, I'll use that word again, Pollyanna views about families and the sorts of things that are very difficult to create in an enduring way.
Yes, and beyond story, it's like we're all lying to each other a little bit all the time. So you have to know somebody pretty well before they tell you that the kids aren't okay. In fact, we don't like people who tell us the kids aren't okay too soon.
Well, what do you think when it comes to kids who really aren't okay? I mean, they're born with disabilities of one sort or another, or they are autistic, or they have, emotional problems that are almost in some ways irresolvable and so forth.
I think those point to a lot of different directions for me. So there's something about unhappiness and being at war with yourself or at war with the world that is the most heartbreaking to me. I know a lot of people who didn't get a perfectly working machine, but still have a lot of joy and connection. So it's the people who can't feel belonging or can't believe in life that break my heart.
And where does that broken heart lead you? I mean, you want to reach out to them? You want to give them some kind of sense of your compassion or love even?
It maybe makes me want to see them and talk about them for everybody's sake. I mean, I think that's part of what the TED Talk is really about for me. It's that it's harder than anybody's admitting to just have kind of a regular life, I mean, I always felt, even when I was young, even before I had been in love, I thought if you get from one end of your adulthood to the other with the same person and none of your children die, that's like what I want. That was my biggest dream. I thought everything else I'll try to figure out and make the best of. But please don't put me through a wicked relationship, and please don't take my kid.
You are the poet of the ordinary, aren't you?
That's what they say.
That was the name that was given to you, or a description was given to you by, I think, the Huffington Post. We both interviewed Ariana, that we can at least speak of in our experience of interviewing. But I think you and I mirror each other in some ways, wanting to be of service and to help people who are down and be empathic and serve the public and all of these kinds of things. In itself, I mean, these are noble goals and everything, but they're also very difficult to put into action. Even the roles we play, and yours is much more significant now than mine ever was, but it's challenging, constantly challenging, and almost axiomatic that you're going to make maybe small little progress at the best. Maybe we should have been therapists. I don't know, rather than doing the work we're doing.
I think it's not that hard to be useful. It just is it's just a question of like to how many and how deeply.
Yeah, and those are big questions. So yeah.
But like you can sort of be on the side of being useful to those who happen to track what you're up to. You know what I mean? And that's enough. I mean, I'm just trying to not be a negative. Like, I'm just trying not to add to the problems. And that I feel can be done. Like that I feel confident that I can achieve that. And then if I would to like ask for a little more, it would be to be useful to any number of people.
Does that mean people who you see on the street who are suffering, of homeless people who come up to you and ask for a sandwich or some money or whatever?
I don't know what to do with those live interactions. I never have. I work for United Way coming out of college, and I never could shake the idea that it's much better to pay your taxes according to the tax code and then donate to trustworthy organizations than it is to do this one-off stuff on the street. But maybe that's a false choice. Like maybe you could pay your taxes as required. Like if everybody paid their taxes, as Matthew Desmond told me when I interviewed him, just according to the code as we have it now, we could solve poverty. There's plenty of money. We're just not even collecting it. So then thing two is, do you donate? And I try to do the effective altruism thing. We try to donate 10%. It's, it's always like...
You tithe yourself?
The two of us, our family.
Yeah, you tithe yourself.
Yeah, we tithe ourselves, yeah. And then the last thing is, how do you deal with people eyeball to eyeball? And the feeling I have, and I don't know if it's right, and I'd be curious if people are writing in about this. I'd love to hear what they think or what they do. I do feel like making eye contact with people is important for both parties. So sometimes I'll say, hi. And I think that it's this tiny, like, gossamer tethering to the world. Because I think the most crazy making thing about living on a street must be being ignored. Must be that no one will look at you.
I think it was Camus who said you can sometimes affect a person's desire or propensity or tropism, whatever you want to call it, to commit suicide one way or the other just by saying hello and showing them that you recognize them and that you're aware of their existence and give them a sense of some confirmation. Here's another question for you from Lisa in San Francisco, who wants to know, what inspired you to begin writing, and how did your early experiences shape your career as an author?
Well, I had this professor who gave me a C- on my first paper in graduate school. And I was like, I am going to write bestseller after bestseller after bestseller to prove that guy wrong. No, that is not at all why I wanted to write. I always wanted to write. I always thought it was the coolest thing to do. Like when I was in middle school, we read great. It was the first time I remember really loving literature. Like we read A Separate Piece. We read To Kill a Mockingbird. We read 3 or 4 other books in 7th grade that I thought, of all the things that people can do, of all the cool tricks that there are in the whole wide world, this is the trick that I would like to learn how to do. And then it got glued to this other thing, which is on Christmas Eve, we used to go to my Aunt Mary's house. My dad was one of 6 kids. There are like 30 cousins. It was a very crowded house. There were 6 people who lived in the house. There was 1 bathroom. So there's literally like a line for the bathroom at our Christmas Eve dinner, and the boys would just go outside in the snow. And at some point, after all the like cornflake casseroles had been devoured, one of my aunts or uncles would stand up on the coffee table and tell a joke to the whole room. And then the next one would go, and then the next one would go. And I remember thinking, oh, I want to do that too. Like, I want to be able to entertain people. I want to be able to stand up and tell a story and make people laugh.
And you do. And you do it very well. But you're not writing fiction.
No.
You wrote memoirs.
I tried.
Yeah.
I tried fiction, and I got shot down by my agent.
So when did you make the shift to memoir?
I always started there. So I wrote, I thought I was going to try to write a novel in my 20s. I didn't know an agent or an editor or a publisher. I didn't know the difference between those 3 things. I was completely on the outside. And this was pre-internet. So that like I would go to the bookstore and buy a catalog of agents, literary agents. And they were sorted by like science fiction and short story. And then I read Anne Lamott. And I read Operating Instructions, and I saw her speak at City Arts and Lectures in San Francisco. And I did not know, because I had gone to grad school to get a master's in literature where we were reading Shakespeare and Dickens and Alice Walker and Toni Morrison and Salman Rushdie. I did not know there was a kind of book like the stuff Anne Lamott wrote. And I remember like turning it around in my hands and thinking, if this is real, like if people consider this a book, like this is my lane. And that opened up this possibility to me, because at the time I thought people who wrote memoirs were like Barbara Streisand or Lee Iacocca.
She just wrote a 900-page autobiography.
Yes. Like I didn't know that you could just be some Joe Blow who was telling you some story about their life.
But Anne, who has become a friend, we had our differences through the years. If people may know about that, but we've become closer now. She's become evangelical about writing.
Mm-hmm.
You feel that way? Everybody should write? Even people who maybe don't know what they want to say or don't have much to say or feel confounded by the whole process?
No, I don't know if I would say everybody has to do anything except for maybe get some fresh air every day or try to sleep 8 hours every night. Like, I don't know that. But I do think that any hobbies where you're slowing down that are non-digital are, for me, have been hugely calming. Like I puzzle. I do 1,000-piece puzzles all the time. I have one going at all times. And I paint. And both of those things are so old school. And I mean, I really think they're fundamental to what a day feels like to me.
Well, your days are pretty rich from the sounds of it. And before I officially say goodbye to you, I just want to congratulate you on all you've achieved. And I want to thank all of you who have joined us for this live episode of Gray Matter with Michael Krasny, which you can listen to live every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific time, or on Apple, Spotify, or on our website at graymatter.show. And if you haven't yet become a member of this podcast, again, I invite you to join by going to our website at graymatter.show. You can find previous episodes there of Gray Matter with Michael Krasny. And again, that's Gray with an E. Also invite you to mail any reactions or suggestions you might have to me at mkrasny@graymatter.show. My thanks to our great team, Alex, Shannon, Chad, Kevin, Colin, Jeff, and Colleen and Tanya, and a special thanks to our special guest, Kelly Corrigan. Thank you, Kelly.
My pleasure.
I'm Michael Krasny.
Bandwidth for Gray Matter is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.